I hit this frequency that I honestly haven't hit since I was probably like a kid. And I don't know how else to describe it other than like I hit this frequency and it was like the whole world slowed down. And I was literally just in between dimensions in a way, in a very like physical way that I have not been since I was a kid. And I was like, holy shit, like this like deep space of like grief. It's like this very tender space, like literally is, I'm on the bridge. And I was like crying because of my grief, but I was crying because I was like, this is like a beautiful space. And I just remember being like, this space also feels like home.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about grief because a lot of people are actually crossing right now. So this happens a lot with eclipses, and there's a huge just transition out energy, I feel like, moving into 2025. So we're in one of those cycles right now. And I know that obviously you have your experiences with this. And we've talked about grief on the show in different capacities, but I did want to talk to you about it because I feel like that has been something you've known intimately for a very long time, and you know, losing a sibling early on. So I mean, we could start wherever you want. Like how do you feel like that's informed who you are?
Oh my God, it has informed everything about who I am because I learned how to hold space for people from the age of 4, you know, and really like regulating my family, I feel like, is what I did, because my parents kind of gauged like how they were doing based on how I was doing, which I mean you have to do to some degree, I imagine, because you want your child to be okay. But they kind of, I think, I don't want to say ignored, but they kind of didn't really pay as much attention to how they were doing. They just focused it on me. Like, for example, they sent me to therapy and they never went for themselves, which I remember as a child made me angry, you know, because I was like, why do I have to do this? Like, there's something wrong, quote, wrong with me. Because it felt like something was wrong with me since they weren't going to. Like, it wasn't something that felt normal. And so I remember after a certain period where they would just always be asking me how I am. I'm like, I'm fine. Like, are you guys fine? You know?
Did you ever ask them why they weren't going?
No, because I was so young.
Yeah.
I don't think that I've brought it up to them in my adult life either. I've talked to my sister about it. My sister is also about to be a licensed therapist, so she has a really unique lens, and she wasn't around, you know. So I was 4 when my sister passed, who was 2 at the time, and then when I turned 5, my sister that's still living was born. So she, you know, she never knew a life with my parents not in that space of grief. And so it also just, I mean, I've always carried this sense of like life is short, but also, you know, something that my mom taught me from a young age was like, we're not going to leave until our mission is complete. And she used her own, you know, language at the time. She always said, you can't die if God's purpose is not complete with you on this earth. And I actually reminded her of that in my cousin's passing recently, because she was, you know, expressing to me anger of like, how could he be so young and have so much that he could be left to do on this earth? And I told her, I was like, Mom, it's impossible for a soul to leave before they are ready. Like, we don't have to understand it. But that's the, you know, that's how soul contracts work. Like, his soul knew, you know? And so, yeah, I think it's informed my life in the way of holding space. And then also just, I've always had this awareness of like, death is a very natural part of life. Like, because then when I was 16, my best friend passed in a car accident, and he was like a sibling as well. You know, he was in the hospital room when I was born. So yeah, it's been a big theme in my life, and it has also caused me, I think, to be very vocal, like always telling people that I love them, always like making sure that there's open communication, because any conversation could be your last. And I really try to have conversations in that way of like everything. If this were the last conversation that I have with you, would I be okay with that?
Yeah. Yeah. How did they explain it to you when you were 4?
So they told me that she was in heaven.
Mm.
But I also knew, like, because she was sick. She was always sick. And so, you know, they had always told me, like, she has these problems. She had water on the brain. And so she would have seizures. And so and like, you know, sometimes when she would have seizures, she would throw up and things like that. And so I always knew that she was not, like, that she didn't have a normal life. She also had, like, the tubes in your ears. Like, this is, I think, a common thing, but when babies have a lot of ear infections, they don't like to do that or something like that. And then she got the tubes, and it was essentially like she had been deaf before. And we like walked outside and she was hearing all these things.
Wow.
And so I was probably, you know, 3 or 4, but I remember that. And also, you know, I just didn't have very much time with her, but my mom tells this story that she always cries about. And she's like, you know, when your sister passed and we were about to go, like, have our last viewing at, like, to see her body for the last time, they were like, okay, we're going to go say goodbye to your sister, like, after she had passed. And we're at the funeral. And I was like, are we in heaven? And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I thought that JC was in heaven. And she was like, you know, how do I explain to this child that the body is here, but the soul is not, and all these things. And so she was like, it was just really, you know, precious, because I had this, like, I understood. I was like, you said she was in heaven. Now you said we're going to go see her. So what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't really know how they navigated that, but I know that they used, you know, religion a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that was honestly probably a good thing, because it was, you know, very comforting for me at the time. It was like, okay, well, you know, she's good. She's in a better place than us. So
yeah. So tell me more about how that informed how you felt, responded, like, healed with your best friend passing when you were in high school.
Well, that one was a lot different, because I grew up obviously very religious, but it was not just that I was in that dynamic. Like, I very much believed it for myself, because I had always had spiritual experiences from the time that I was really young, right? Probably because I was, you know, close to the other side. And also my grandpa had passed before I was born, and I always felt very connected to him. Obviously, looking back, I can understand that more now. Wait, sorry, what was your question?
Like, how, you know, you have that early experience with a sibling passing, and I guess how that
with my
affected,
friend.
yeah.
So in middle school, my best friend, his name was Taylor, we, like, started this Bible study together, because I was very, like, I just had this very, like, I don't know, missionary complex basically, even though I lived, you know, in Oklahoma, which is very religious. And so I was like, I'm gonna do something for my school. I'm gonna start this Bible study. We started it together. And so we were, like, very much on the same page. And then when we went to high school, he was like, oh, I'm an atheist now. And which, like, I understand, because he was dealing with real life shit. And especially where we were in that community, like, at least that I experienced, churches didn't talk about real shit. Like, it's like you just sweep everything under the rug, especially for a middle schooler. Like, there was absolutely no awareness of, like, mental health at all. It's literally like you just stuff it all down. And so he was, you know, really struggling, and really just, like, he's a Scorpio too. Just really close to, like, the darker parts of human existence. And so he was like, yeah, I'm an atheist now. So we would always fight about it, because in my mind, I have this very black and white view of, like, if you're not a Christian, you're going to hell. And so actually the last conversation that we had was about religion. It was a text conversation. It wasn't like a fight, but it was like me saying, like, popping off to him about something. And so from my worldview at that time, you know, he passed and he was not in heaven.
Wow.
Yeah. And now, of course, again, looking back, like, I had this thread of truth that never let, like, really my physical body even, like, accept that. But I had to wrestle with it. Like, and it was really, really hard for me at the time, because it was so alienating, because it's like all of my friends were church friends. And, you know, they didn't really want to touch the subject. I mean, I wouldn't have either. But, you know, they were just kind of like, well, you just have to trust that, like, you know, God's plan, whatever. Like, if someone's not supposed to be with him, you know, just like,
Mhm.
you just kind of have to let it go. And so it was really, really hard for me because I was having this existential crisis of like, can I really believe that this person that I love so much is in hell? And also, you know, then people wanted to have the conversation of like, oh, well, maybe he was just lost for a while because like he was a Christian before. And like, so maybe he is in heaven. And that's kind of what I used to just like, like let myself get by for however long. But the most important dream I've ever had, I had after he passed. And this was also like what led me through all of that. And I just like held on for dear life to this dream because he had a funeral and like I spoke at it, and like there was a verse that I read that was about like comforting people, and it actually still, I really like that verse because it's basically about like what we go through it to help others. And so his funeral had already passed, and I have this dream where we're outside, and it's funny because it was actually at my sister's cemetery, but that's not like where he was buried or where we had the funeral or anything. And it was just this ball of light, which at this time I didn't understand energy or light or anything. It was this ball of light that literally just looked like a ball of light, but I knew that it was Jesus. Like it was Yeshua's spirit. And so I just know this. And in the dream, he says to me, it's time to say goodbye. And so Jesus walks me like down this little pathway, and then my friend appears. And so then I got to like hug him and say goodbye. And in the dream, it was not a goodbye. Like it was like, yes, goodbye. And yes, this is hard, but this is not final. Like this is not final. It's final in the sense of your two souls will not be in these bodies anymore, but it's not final. And so I guess just experiencing, I think from like a nervous system perspective, already having dealt with the loss from so young helped me a lot because, I mean, I had to just continue life as normal, you know, and it was a really big deal, this passing in my high school, because it was Taylor, and then there was another of his friends in the car, and there were two people in my high school that were just like, I mean, he was a lot like me. Like, we were just two huge personalities. Like, he was always just, like, hilarious, like, making everyone feel so good. And I didn't know his friend as well, but he was also just, like, a great, you know, it was really hard for the whole community. But eventually, everyone just is kind of like, whatever, goes back along with their lives. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in class, like, having an existential crisis, like, we know, whatever. And that was when I shut off my crying as well, because I remember I was just sobbing to my best friend at the time. And to her defense, like, I, as a 16-year-old that had never experienced loss, I probably wouldn't know what to do with someone either. But she literally said to me, she's like, I'm going to need you to stop crying because I don't know how to handle it. And so literally didn't cry for like at least 6 years, like at all, like not a single teardrop. And then, you know, it was a process of opening it back up. But I think just having that radical self-trust of like, I know everything's going to be okay, even if it's so painful and you're so confused from a young age, is what like carried me through that. As well as just like, I think being willing to like sit in really uncomfortable shit, like the possibility that my best friend could be in hell, and how could that be, you know?
Yeah. I mean, wow, I totally forgot that's what he told us.
Yeah.
I feel like it's funny because at my school and my church, I feel like there was like what we were taught, but then there was what everybody else was saying. And I'm like, yeah, no, that is what they said in religion class. But then my parents would be like, oh no, like only like really bad people go to hell. Like everybody else is, you're pretty much going to go to heaven.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there were just so many conflicting messages. But I think about that now, and oh, my heart just hurts about that kind of thinking where it's like somebody just passed and we're worried about like, it's just judgment. Like we're that deep in judgment. Like that just like breaks my heart. But I'm like, it feels like another life.
I know.
What changed your beliefs?
So many things. It was years and years of, I mean, first I had to put a lot of things down, you know, and I had to be really really comfortable with not knowing. You know, my really like walking away from religion happened when I was in college, which is kind of ironic because I went to a Christian school. But I had a lot of really good mentors while I was there who actually like they consider themselves to be Christians, but they're so open-minded, and like studying a social science helped me because it's so much like you have to be, I mean, you have to be more open-minded to be able to study something like that, or to teach something like that, I guess. And I remember an advisor that I had at school was talking about beliefs and talking about like, well, how open-minded is too open-minded and how universal is too universal. Like people were asking him this question, and he was just talking about like holding your faith with an open hand, and trusting that like if it's meant to be there, then it is. But like when you start to clutch, that's when basically it's scarcity. And so I just started to see like everything that I was taught, like people weren't actually living it. And honestly, it really just came back to love for me, because I've just been so like my whole life, that's just been, you know, I've talked about this on the podcast, like I'm just love on tap, you know, and that's why I always wanted to do the things I wanted to do. That's why I traveled and like, you know, taught different places to just like go love on some kids for a while, whatever. And I was like, none of this is resonant with love. Like this is just a bunch of fucking rules. And at the time I couldn't see the good. Like I had to be like really fucking pissed for a while and like this is all bullshit, and like truly walk away and be willing to say like, fuck, if I go to hell, like this is my experience right now, you know? Like I have to really be willing to find what's true for me. And it was hard because I had no examples of people who had like done that, really, you know? And so putting down rules and being like, okay, I know that there is a God because I've talked to them my whole life and felt guided by God my whole life, but I have no idea like in what context that actually makes sense for me. And so I still had faith. And I kind of always knew like, okay, well, if I've been divinely guided this whole time, then I will continue to be. But I think the most important thing was taking a break. Like I was not seeking anything. I was not going to church. I was not like, you know, gonna convert to a Muslim. Like I was just like, whatever. And then eventually I mean, there's probably a lot of other things that I don't remember, but I got interested in astrology and started really learning about the new and the full moon specifically, and just like the cycles of life. And that was really resonant for me. That and like plants and crystals, honestly, like it was physical health that led me to spiritual health, because again it was just like, oh, all of these things that we've been taught about the body and just treating symptoms, like it wasn't resonant for me anymore. And so once I started learning about the body, and once, you know, you were talking about this in the previous episode that we did about depression, it's like you kind of have to decalcify, detox all these things to the physical body before we're even ready to like have our third eye be open. And so it was a really slow process of me just finding things that were resonant for me. And then eventually I just realized that I was, you know, because the first real like quote spiritual experience I had was talking to a medium, and I felt my best friend on the other side speaking directly to me. And it was like, I was like, oh, this is like, you can't make this shit up. You know, like I felt it. And he also gave me a message that was like for my logical brain, because I was like, there's no way that this person would know this to say this to me that he just said to me. But then eventually I was like, well, I also can talk to the other side. Yeah. I also have this connection to the other side, to the planet, to animals, to all of these things. So it was a really slow process.
What did he say?
He just said he was talking about algebra class, which is our last class that we had together. She was like, he's saying something about algebra. And this was like at the end where he had already said some things that were already resonating. And she was like, there's just something about algebra I just have to tell you. And I was like, yeah, that was the last class that we had together. Yeah. And that was where we felt still very close, even though we were in completely different worlds. Because, I mean, it's a typical high school story, right? Like my high school was very... like there were the cliques, you know, and he was in band, and like I was in sports, and we didn't have any really crossover, but that was the class where like we still sat by each other and like, you know.
It's interesting. Like I'm thinking about it for myself as you're talking, and I'm like, there was a stretch of time, I would say maybe like 8 or 9 years, where I was just very firmly like, I don't know what I believe in.
Yeah.
I don't believe in anything. And like, I knew that I didn't, because I grew up Catholic, and then eventually I was like, this is not making sense. It's not making sense. And every question I would ask, like the priest and the teacher, like I was not getting my answers. So I was like, this isn't, the math isn't mathing. And I started learning like loosely about different religions, and I studied a lot of different like religions. And then I started dating someone who, him and his whole family were like atheist. I was like, okay, this makes sense kind of. But then I thought more about it, and I was like, this doesn't make sense to me either. And I also knew I had very real conversations with Yeshua and God or whatever that was, but I was like, how does this all map together? And I think for me, and at that time I had repressed all of my memories from when I communicated with spirit. Like I was completely repressed. And I remember talking to someone about it, and I was like, it doesn't make any sense to me that we just go in the dirt. Like, then where does all this come from? Like this animation. I was trying to figure out consciousness, and I didn't know how. And then when I got to college, I think studying philosophy and specifically like the ontological argument, like brought me in from another angle. And then I started studying different religions again, but like in deeper ways. And I just went on this exploration. And I think for me, like the important thing was that it wasn't like I was Catholic, curious about other things. It was like I was nothing, curious about everything. And I even would like go back into, you know, other sects of Christianity and like look at I was like, let me relearn this because everything it's all different. I think that was really important for me to like kind of believe in nothing. And when I went from that angle, I was looking at the commonalities between everything and the things that like landed. I was like, that makes sense to me. And then you start getting, for me, it was like, I started reading books like Many Lives, Many Masters and things like that, and then starting to learn about regressions and hypnosis and the brain and like consciousness in other ways. And that was when I was like, oh, this is what actually makes sense. Like this makes the most logical sense to me, and having different lifetimes makes the most logical sense to me. And that was like before I reactivated all my talking to the other side, which is like really interesting to me because it wasn't I believe this because I had a conversation with a dead person. It was like that all happened, and then separately all that came back online, and then I remembered all of the other things. So it's just interesting to me. Like that was kind of how I came to it. Yeah, I guess
it's fascinating.
Yeah,
and I feel like if we sat here for long enough, we would remember all of these different threads and be like, oh my god, you know, because it happens on like different planes. I feel like especially for you and I, it's like we also are so intellectual. It has to make sense on an intellectual level before I ever really like sank into the truth of what I could feel. You know?
Totally. Yeah, I can't like be like I believe this and not be able to explain it, I guess.
Exactly.
That's map.
Yeah, totally. And like there's certain things that I guess I did live first. Like I speak about the experience of when I met Carlos, and it was like that's when I started believing in past lives, because I was just like, I fucking know this person. Like, and I know that this person, there's not a single doubt in my mind, but I didn't actually learn about it until I was like, okay, I feel curious about this, you know. And you know, the person that I dated while I was in college that helped me through a lot of this was also very, I mean, he wasn't anything. He didn't call himself anything, but he had like studied a lot of like Buddhist teachings, and so had his mom, and his mom helped me a lot with all of these types of things, and just like accepting that there's so much we don't know, and accepting that you can like hold all of it. You know, I think I can't remember if this is the term, but I have a friend that says that there's like a type of like there's a title for this spirituality called, I think it's omniist. It's like I find truth in everything. And that resonated a lot for me, because I studied anthropology, and so every single class that I took was about the culture and religion of a different place. And so I felt like I had that knowledge to back up like there definitely are threads of truth in all of these major world religions, and that's in that ties in with culture, that ties in with the history, that ties in with people like Jesus or Muhammad, or like all of these people that you know are tied to these different religions. And that really helped me to sit in the in-between and be like, it's fine. I know that I'll figure it out eventually. And I like you, I needed that time. I needed that time where I didn't have to actively like look. Because also I was like, okay, the fact that my whole life I was fed something that I just like believed from someone, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
Like I want to take my time finding what is actually resonant for me. And I was so like, I didn't know how to like tap into my body back then, you know? And so I would have never used that language of like what resonated for me in my body. But that was a big part of it too.
Yeah.
Like finding what sits right with me in my body.
Definitely. Well, one of the things that's interesting for me is me feeling so clear on my beliefs about, you know, when we pass and the soul and all of that, and spending a lot of time talking to souls that have passed and all of that. Like there's that whole experience, and then there's my human experience of when a loved one has crossed. And in some ways I feel like it's a hindrance to have that knowledge, because I think in some ways it stops me from feeling all of the feelings that are probably in there, where I'm like, and then in other ways, like, I don't know, I think there have been people who have passed where I just feel like I should have more emotion about it, but it's like I don't, because it doesn't feel permanent the way it did before. It's like, yeah, I'll talk to you tomorrow, just like you'll be in a hologram form, you know. So it created this weird thing for me. But then there have been, you know, other times where I'm super emotional and I'm like, my brain is like, why are you crying? It's like, it's, you know, you can talk to them, or, but there's that very real, like, you just, you know, that person's not going to be with you every single day. And I think, I mean, I don't know my full analysis on that, but it's just been something interesting for me to navigate within myself about like my emotions around it. And I think that then people like will come to me, like my family, you know, for like a spiritual answer that's supposed to just make them feel better. I'm like, but the spiritual answer doesn't always make you feel better. Like you can know the spiritual answer or whatever. Yeah, they're in a better place. Like, yeah, you can talk to them, but like that doesn't negate all of the pain and sadness that you're just feeling on a human level of like, well, we're not going to go get coffee tomorrow like we always do. You know, and it's like this, I think of it like this. It's like the cord, like a cord just snaps. Yeah. You know, it's just like, it's so out of left field, even when you know it's coming, right? Whether that person has been sick for a long time or if it's like a freak accident, like energetically, there is this cord you have with this person that like snaps in a way because they're going into a different density, and so it's a different cord that you grow together to like, because you can still have that connection. And in many ways, you know what I mean, for me, depending on the person, typically like when they cross, I'm much closer because now I'm talking to their soul, I'm talking to their ego, and like a lot will come out. And for me, actually, depending on the person, that's been sometimes harder, where I'm getting like a lot of truths that I didn't get when they were in the physical. And that is a jolting experience, like no matter what you believe about, you know, the afterlife, I'm like, I can know that it's all good and chill and they're on to the better place and they're learning their soul lessons and all of that. And I can talk to them, but there's still that very real, like something just got unplugged from me. And I can feel that difference in the entire frequency of my life, you know, because they were a player in my life and it just, the game changed. And I think there's just like acknowledging that emotion. I think like a lot of times when navigating grief, we've got to ask, what are we really asking for? Like, are you just looking for a way to not feel it? And why? Like, I think that's the question. People are like, how do I navigate this? How do I get through this? Like, what are you really asking them? Like, or like, what are you wanting? Are you wanting to stop crying? Are you wanting to believe a certain thing? Like, what are you actually asking? I think that's what people need to ask themselves, because on a base level, I'm like, there's just you have an emotional response and you let yourself have an emotional response. And it might not be a fun emotional response, but it's just what happens, you know? And then I'm like, then there's how much of that emotional response is colored by what we believe about death, you know, like why we don't celebrate, right? But I'm like, even in cultures where they do celebrate, like there's still a sadness. It's like you send your kid off to college.
Yeah.
Like you could be super excited for them, they could be super happy, and you're still gonna cry. You're celebrating them, right? And you're still gonna cry because you're like, things are different. And like that, I think that's okay too.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think about this, because this has helped me so much, even just in orientation, since she told this to me. But I had a coach who told me, because I was telling her, I was like, sometimes I just think about what's gonna happen when my dog passes. Like, I am not gonna be okay.
Yeah.
And she was like, you know, the piece of you that wants him in the physical is your physical body. She was like, it's your human. You're in the 3D and you want that connection on the 3D level. So it's exactly like what you were just saying, like the cord. You want that cord to be like 3D to 3D. And she was like, how do you know that it's not going to be better when he's on the other side? How do you know that you're not going to get even more close to him when he's on the other side? And she was like, it's also okay that your physical body wants that physical closeness. And she was like, but it goes so much beyond that. And that's kind of how I understand it now too, because it's like how close you are to someone in the 3D is how much I feel like it hurts, especially initially in the 3D. So it's like, if you were to, it's like, I see you I talk to you every single day. So every single day when I think of you, it's going to be painful. And not only that, but it's like, because we do so many things together, anything that I do that makes me think of you is going to be sad because you're not with me anymore in the physical. Whereas, you know, for me, my cousin passing, it's like we weren't really in each other's physical reality in the past few years. And so, of course, it's sad. And of course, like, when you think of those things that you would do together in the future, that's kind of what brings it up. But I think that that's why, at least that's just how I'm understanding it right now. But that's why certain, you know, deaths are harder for people, because it's like, if it's someone that's in your 3D reality all the time, of course, that's going to be so much more painful, like I said, especially in the beginning, because like you aren't used to navigating your 3D reality without them. Whereas someone who, you know, it's a distant friend or a distant relative or whatever, you're just not confronted with it as much.
Oh, 100%. It's like, especially when they're embedded in your daily routines. You know, it's like, oh, I didn't see you at work today. Like, of course you're gonna feel sad. So I think that just brings me back to, I'm like, you know, for people to look at, like, what do you really wanting, like, and why are you wanting to get out of it? Like, that just, it's gonna happen. You know, I'm curious how you navigated it when your friend passed in high school, because that is someone that you saw regularly.
But even then I still felt like it, like, every time I thought of him being gone for a good like 5 years, it just felt kind of weird to me. Because and again, looking back, I can kind of understand that it's because like I still felt him very much with me, even more to a certain degree. And it was like we still had so much life to live that it was just weird to think about, like, why am I not going to tell him where I'm going to college, and like, why is he not going to be at my wedding, things like that, you know, even graduating high school, you know. And so that part was hard for me to think about and navigate. I'm trying to like remember how I navigate. At the beginning I tried to lean on friends, because I've always been like an external processor and like extrovert, you know, those types of things. So I was trying to lean on my friends, and again, just felt very like they just didn't know how to hold space for me. And so eventually I think that I just kind of went within, and I mean, my family was very much there for me. They obviously knew what I was going through. But I did have one friend that I just kind of really leaned on, and so I met this person 2 days before my friend passed. And so that person was just really there for me, and it was like a new connection, and he only knew me through my grieving process, really. And so I just spent a lot of time with him. And I feel like he was kind of a vibrational bridge that like carried me into the new, like he was just very much there for me and let me kind of emote as much as I needed to. Which is really all I needed. I think that I just really needed to emote. And since I wasn't crying anymore, it was like I needed to emote in other ways of like expressing frustration or things like that. But really what helped me was my friend came through to me on the other side. And, you know, I tell this story because it has informed the way that I love to this day. And it's taught me like, it's like a circle, like, so like I've gone all the way in the spiral there and back again. And, you know, we've had conversations about boundaries and about how I love, and so much of the way that I love is because of this experience. Have you seen Gattaca? Have I already told you this?
Yeah, I have seen Gattaca.
Yeah, so we had just watched Gattaca in our biology class that I had with Taylor. And I don't really like those kinds of movies in general, but like I remember I was just really more interested in it than normal. So for people who haven't watched it, it's about genetic engineering and like the ethical problems of this. And basically there's this guy that wants to be an astronaut, and they split society into two. So there's valids and there's invalids. Invalids are people that were not genetically engineered, that were like, they were born on accident, basically. Valids is everyone else that was genetically engineered. And so there's this invalid guy that's the protagonist that wants to be an astronaut, and it's just his story about how he's going to become an astronaut. And he has a brother that's valid. And every year they go to the ocean and they like swim to this rock and they swim back, and it's just this race that they do. And so this invalid guy that wants to be an astronaut is like training, and like the story is building. And so they go for their annual race and they go to the ocean, and so they're swimming there, swimming back. The invalid wins by a landslide, like wins the race completely. The valid brother is swimming back out of breath. He's like, what? Like, how the fuck did you win? And he goes, save nothing for the swim back. And there, I don't remember where I was or what was going on, but I was having this moment of like, what the fuck is the point? Like, if everyone is just gonna die, or like not listen to us about God, or what, like literally what is the point? And I had this voice that was like, save nothing for the swim back with love. Like, you're not waiting for someone to die or someone to reject, like, you just love.
Yeah.
You're not saving any part of yourself. And that was what got me through, because it was like, I knew that I had just received truth. And at the time I was like, oh, that was the voice of God. But now I know it was Taylor. It's all the same, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was really what got me through.
Yeah.
And that was really quickly after he passed,
I think the two things for me that help the most are like, one, anything is always harder when you feel like things were left unsaid, or like it didn't feel complete. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like when it felt like there was an incompletion piece. And for me, when people have crossed and I'm like very aware of the incompletion piece within themselves, that's what makes it really hard for me. But I think that it goes back to, I think you and I both live that way for like different reasons, but like really you've got to realize that anything can happen at any time. And like, you got to just leave it all on the table. Yeah. But I think that's what really messes with people's heads, because it's like, it didn't feel complete to them. And so you've got to ask, like, what would make it feel complete? Do you need to resolve something? Do you want to say your piece? Like what would feel complete for you? Because I think that is like the hardest piece. One, and two is being able to connect with the other side does help for sure. Because you're getting like real answers straight from that person. And I think that I just want everybody to know their own intuitive gifts and know that they can have that connection, and notice all of the ways that loved ones can come through and say hi and connect in. And I think if you're listening and you feel like you don't have that, it is happening. You might just not realize it. And I think people just need to take some more space to kind of realize it. And so, I mean, there's sitting down in meditation and calling them forward. Like, for me, having objects from that person is like a way to anchor in and call forward that person. Like, call to them, and then you use your knowing, your feeling, your seeing, whatever. You can use guided meditations, whatever it is. But I think there's also just that awareness of like in your daily life, signs and synchronicities, and like knowing how they come through. I know that you have really strong connections in that way. Like, maybe you can share some of the ways that you get that constant communication.
Yeah. So for me, and what I'll say for people as well, is like, it's okay to go to a professional psychic, like, especially in the beginning, especially if you've never connected with the other side. Because that was my journey, it was. And even now, like, not specific, I've already talked to my cousin, that first day, I very much feel him with me, but I'm also like years and years down my journey of using my intuitive gifts, and so like, it's okay to also go see a professional. Well,
I just say that though because I want to validate people.
No, yeah.
Like, after my uncle died last year, my mom and some of my aunts and uncles, they would say things like they were almost not embarrassed, but like, is this okay? And I'll be like, but I feel him. Like, and I'm like, yeah, mom, like that's him.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to validate her. Like, yes, you were feeling him. Like that is real. It's not just you making it up. She's like, I don't know how you feel so close. And I'm like, yeah, you know, and so I just want to validate people too.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's such a good point too, because I think that there's some, especially like with religion, right? I've seen this in my own family of like, it's like kind of taboo. Because it's like, oh, am I supposed to think that they're still around, or am I supposed to think that like they're only in heaven and I can only talk to God, you know? And it's like, you're feeling them, you know?
Well, but I'll say also they all act differently once they pass. That's the other piece. But
yeah, we could get into a whole thing of like, how do we, you know? But yeah, calling them forth is a great way to be sure that you're connecting, you know, not that it's 100% of the time, but it's a great way to invite that in. But so for me, the first time that I talked to someone who talked to him, she was like, do you just get random words? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, do you write them down? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, oh, that's him sending them to you. So I had already, and you know, again, at this time I didn't know that I got downloads. Like that wasn't a thing. I didn't associate it as that. I was just like, oh, that's a good word. Write that down. Like maybe I'll journal about it or something.
Yeah.
But I already had like
what kind of words?
Like essentially like oracle card words.
Okay.
So essentially at this time I was already like, I think I had already started reading tarot, and I, you know, used oracle decks. So it would be like, I don't know, surrender, something like that, you know? And so I would just write them down, and sometimes it would be like phrases or sentences. And so those were coming from him. And so then once I had that awareness, I'm like, oh, this comes through in this way. And it's much easier to like, then now I know that this is how he talks to me. But cultivating that for myself, I think, you know, sometimes you just have to ask. Like my grandpa, the first time that I ever got a sign from him that I was like, I know this is from you, I asked him. I was like, Grandpa, show me how you talk to me. Immediately saw 444. And that was actually the first angel number I ever saw like years ago when I was like, didn't know what anything was, you know? And so I was thinking back, like, of course, this is the first one that I saw. And with my sister, you know, I actually hadn't really worked with talking to my sister until more recently. Taylor, my friend, was definitely that bridge for me, because it was like we were so close in the physical. I was there when he passed, you know, and I hadn't worked with my sister really until, like I said, recent years. And there was just this, I can't remember what I was thinking about, but I was thinking about this biblical character. Like it just like came up, the story came up, and I just felt my sister. And so I asked her, I was like, is there something that you're related to with this? And she showed me a number, which was like my favorite verse, which had nothing to do with that biblical character, but I needed to just be thinking in that frequency of like, it's something biblical. So sometimes when you feel like it's not necessarily specific right away, you kind of have to ask, at least in my experience. So I asked, you know, like, what is it? And she was like, okay, it's this number. And so now when I see that number, I know it's her. And I think it's like with anything, you kind of, it gets more specific and also more like advanced the more that you use it. And so there are certain themes that my grandpa always comes to tell me about, and there are certain themes that my sister always comes to tell me about. And obviously, like, I'm open to more than that. It's not like I'm gonna assume it's not them, like you've talked about before. Now I just know who's who. But yeah, I had to ask them, like, what is it that you use to talk to me with? And then this is one of my favorite stories. My sister, before she even told me the number, gave me an animal. So I was walking to this person's house and see a skunk, or I was walking to my car and I see a skunk. And it was one of those things where like I heard something in the bushes and thought to myself like, oh, it's just probably a cat. And then my intuition was like, no, look over there. And there was a skunk and it was like raising itself at me, only like 10 feet away. And I was like, so I like tell it telepathically. I'm like, I'm not gonna hurt you if you don't hurt me, like, bruh. And so he scampers off. I'm like, okay, whatever. That was a little odd. So I get home and I check my animal spirit oracle deck, and the message like didn't really resonate. It was just about authenticity. And I was like, okay, I mean, whatever, I'll take it. Next day, I'm walking from my car and see a skunk. I'm like, I've seen like 2 skunks in my life. Like, what
Yeah.
is this? But so then don't think anything of it. I'm just like, whatever. That was in December. So then I fly home for Christmas, and my sister that's living is like, hey, you don't want to see something funny? And I was like, what? And she was like, Mom doesn't know what my first words were. I was like, really? She's like, yeah, watch. She's like, Mom, what's my first word? And my mom was like, oh, I don't know, la, la. And my sister was like, what were Kaylan's first words? And she was like, hot. My first word was hot, because my mom would always be like, don't touch the stove, it's hot. And then my second word was juice. So she knows like my first, second, third words.
Yeah.
And my sister was like, what was JC's first word? And my mom was like, I don't know. She was like, probably kunk. I was like, what? And my mom was like in the kitchen. And so she walks in and she's like, yeah, you don't remember that, Kaylan? I was like, remember what? And she was like, yeah, JC loved the skunk song from Barney.
Oh.
And I like start like, I instantly am like tearing up. I was like, Mom, you did not just fucking say that. And my mom like believes this stuff, but I also like, she struggles with it.
Yeah.
I think like signs and like from, and so, but then I'm just like, okay, I understand the skunk thing now. And then I shit you not, I'm at Disneyland. If anyone goes to Disneyland, you have to tell me if you find this. It's the most random fucking thing in the world. I was at the tree house, and they have like hanging from a tree. This is Tarzan, by the way. This is like everything in Disney is like intentional and themed. There is a skunk like, I don't know, this big, and a little teddy bear hanging from the fucking treehouse.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. So some of the things I feel like happen like that, where like if they want to come through, they're gonna come through, and they're also gonna put the pieces together for you to like figure it out.
Yeah.
But I think that a shortcut is just asking, like,
Yeah.
hey, how do you want to talk to me? Show me.
Yeah.
And then it's a lot easier as well, because since you already asked, it's easier for your brain to associate it with that, because you asked the question.
Yeah. And when you could pick something too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
And I think for a lot of people, it ends up being something that is like sentimental, or like meant something during their relationship. Like there's a connection for you guys there, even though you like just learned about it. But I know for a lot of people, it will be like a thing that they had, or, so it could be significant for them in that way. But I think that, I don't know, like just, you got to play with it a little bit. And the other thing that's interesting for me, and this is more, it's different with science and stuff, but like, because I more primarily talk to people through just like talking, my loved ones, and they will come through at different densities, which is really interesting. So they will come through, I'll say, in a frequency similar to what they were like on Earth. Like that same personality, that same person, whatever. Or they'll come through as like their soul without like stripped away the rest of them. And it's really interesting to get to know people in that different way. And you also get very different like answers to things and very different messages depending on, kind of what stage they're at or what form they want to come in through. So I think I say that because I think that sometimes it's harder for people to recognize when it's more like the soul stage, because when you're more at the soul stage, there's less of a personality feeling attached to it, because you're like with the oneness, if that makes sense. And so you really just have to trust your inner knowing of like, okay, that's them. And I think that's where initiating the conversation is very helpful. And what I'll also say is, when people cross, you have to honor, I guess, their time with when they want to come in and talk. Like sometimes people cross and you don't hear from them immediately, and it takes a second, and sometimes they'll pretty quickly like very strongly be around you. And I think especially when it's a difficult death, like their energy will be very strong because they're trying to like comfort their loved ones. But I think also just recognizing that, it might feel like it comes in and out, or sometimes it takes a while for their energy to come in and talk to you a lot. But if you're putting that call out there and you're open, you'll get to talk to them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point too, because there's certain people as well that come through for me that are so much more at the soul level. Like I have 2 people close to me whose moms passed, and I always describe to them like, it's like I actually feel their frequency even more strongly than I feel my own loved ones, because for both of them, the way that they come through is like pure divine mother. And so like I literally will just always start bawling when I feel them, because it's like just pure love frequency. And they're not even my loved ones that have passed, but then when it's mine, it's usually more of like the personality or I just know their frequency now. So I just know. But
have you connected with your cousin?
Yeah, the day that he passed.
And what did he say?
There was something specific that he told me. I can't remember what he told me specifically. It was very much like I was having a thought, and he like was like, "Hey."
Yeah.
But the feeling that I got was that I knew that it was him, was his humor. Like he was, and it's funny because the past few years of his life, he was more serious, like not in a bad way, just like, he was like a travel photographer, so he's just more serious. But always growing up, he was fucking hilarious. Like he was the funniest one out of all of us.
Yeah.
And so I just like felt his like light humor spirit. And then he was, telling me like, look after everyone, like you're the one that knows how to connect, like make like, because I know that all of my family members, especially like his family, are open to connect. They just are going to need like the tools and like you said, the reassurance of like, he is here, he is around you. And they already know that. So he was just making sure that I helped to facilitate that.
It's interesting. I want to ask more about that, but I never really followed up on. I was talking on social media about the Lacey Peterson thing.
Oh my God, yes. And you talked to her.
I did. I want to talk to her more though, but there's this whole thing about why did this case sweep the nation, so to speak. And there's the what people say in interviews on shows, like, it's this attractive young couple, it's a pregnant woman, it's right around Christmas, like all of those factors. And I'm like, there was something much like bigger. And what it was Lacey's energy trying to connect with as many fucking people as possible.
Yeah.
I'm telling you that. Like, that is why so many people were so invested. I mean, people like all over in that area, everybody was talking about it, like all over the place. And the number of people that stepped up and were trying to find her, I mean, unfortunately, people go missing all the time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people, awful things happen every day. And it's like, why this one was everybody so invested in? And I actually think that there was another woman who lived nearby and around, it was like maybe a couple days or a couple weeks, the same thing happened to her. It was like, God. There was like another weird, at least one thing, but I'm like, why this one, and her energy was trying to connect with a lot of people. And I think that's the other thing, like, we have to realize how that plays into our emotional response, and how we're feeling about things. It's like, we don't always realize that person is trying to contact us or trying to get a message. And so part of that is we're going to think about them, and it's going to, feelings are going to be brought up. And in the same way, take transitioning into the non-physical out of it. If you just haven't talked to somebody in a while and their energy is trying to get a hold of you, and I'm like, okay, if someone pings you, like, you call them. But yeah, that's a whole other topic. But the Lacey Peterson thing, like, I'm like,
so fascinating.
She was trying to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And let them know like what was going on earlier. And that is why, a big reason why it got brought up. Yeah.
This brings me to, I feel like this is also something that we can get more specific in with your audience. It's like, sometimes this has happened to me, not specifically with my cousin, but like my great grandma passed, right? And I wasn't really close to her, and she was obviously a different generation and all these things. And I remember like I had like resistance to talk to her in the beginning when I was talking to the other side, because it's like, we have a certain relationship with them in the 3D. And so we think that has to like carry through, like, oh, I have to be this version of myself with you that I was when you were here. And I really just invite people to like let that go, because like you said, like they don't have the human ego anymore, and you can get a lot deeper and a lot more with them when they're on the other side. And sometimes I think that, it's truly just our own perception of like what this person meant to me while they were here, that is really what blocks people as well sometimes. Yeah. And I felt that even like with my ancestors. And I know that people, this is a whole other thing too, but it's like, when people feel kind of resistance to their ancestors and like what these people did and what they were like, and it's like, we have to remember they're not in that form anymore. It's not like they're just me, but plopped into another density.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah, people don't realize that. I mean, I want to talk about what helped you, I guess, actually navigate it. And I would say for me, when I've lost loved ones, obviously we have to just feel it. Give it time and space. And I think I like really needed to give myself more time and space than I thought I needed. And I would do a lot of like, okay, this is my crying time, or I'll deal with that later. And I like, that's not good.
Yeah.
So I think there's just, I mean, we could go off about feeling, but I'll just kind of leave it at that, about like really just like letting myself feel all of it. And I think also realizing that, you know, I was also processing things for people around me, for people in my family, and also for that person, like unprocessed things for that person, and just kind of letting all of that move through me. And I think really doing a lot with my physical body, like somatically, just like help it move through, and like letting myself be sad girl is really important. And for me, having like a completion ceremony with myself, like, you know, like thanking them for our relationship in that version, just like a celebration completion of my own to kind of close up that, and to like officially open up a new connection point with them. And the non-physical is really important. But I think one of the things that makes it really hard for us whenever people are leaving our lives, whether it's like because of death or it's because of the relationship transitioning for whatever reason, it's like when we're holding on to what life was like yesterday, it's always going to be hard to live life today when it's different. We're setting ourselves up for disappointment. And to have a conscious realization of, okay, that chapter is closing, so let me honor that, be grateful for that, and like very intentionally, this is going to be different. And it helped me a lot to get really clear on, okay, this new chapter, this is what this is going to look like. And these are new things I want to add in and kind of change the whole frequency around it. Because as long as I was trying to like show up in my old reality where that person used to be there, and I'm getting reminded that they're not there every day, like that just made it so much fucking harder for myself. And I know we've had this conversation in other contexts. Like, we've got to be aware of our own expectations as humans, and like, what are we expecting? And if every day like we're expecting them to show up physically, we're going to be let down every single day. And that's where, for me, like very intentionally opening up a new container, and like, doesn't mean I'm not sad, but I'm not having this unconscious expectation it's going to go back to normal. It's not. It's not going to go back to normal. And when people in our lives pass, it is activating a new chapter and a new frequency for everybody around them. Like, I think that people don't really think about the intricate timeline effects of transitions, like, and what that does. And our soul exits, there's the, yes, like the soul is choosing this time and things with our mission and purpose and certain lessons being completed, but there's also this very intricate, beautiful, divine interplay with other people's missions and purposes. And sometimes part of us saying, yes, I'm ready to exit, is because in me exiting, that's going to kick you out of that relationship and make you realize this, and you're going to move. And it's like, that's all connected. And so when that person exits, it forces like contract completions for everybody around them in whatever ways. And it's an activation point for many things that we're not always aware of when it's happening. And it's one thing to resist that and be like, you know, I'm angry that this person left, or I'm sad. You can feel all those feelings and also realize that that forced an opening for everybody. That forced an opening for that person too, right? And that person might freaking reincarnate as your dog, as your child. Like, you don't even know. So I think for me, it helps me a lot. And it's not bypassing any of that other stuff. It's feeling all of that. And also that just forced open a new book. And so let me just step into that new book, so I'm not constantly trying to be in the old book and like being sad about it, because we're just not there anymore. Yeah.
No, I love all of that. It's perfect. I think for me, that's like even going a step beyond what I usually do. I think also just honoring that person in whatever way. Like, I like to do that consciously. Like, think about, what did this person really love and stand for, and how can like I bring that, like the highest version of that into my reality, you know? So for example, I mean, my friend that passed, Taylor, it was like always just making everyone feel good, you know, like just always being that loving, bright person. And like, Steven, my cousin, he just was so brave. Like, he was traveling crazy places all around the world all the time, and he just was like, for the spirit of adventure and seeing more and doing more, which is also very similar to how I live too. But then yeah, the emoting is a huge piece. And I think, like you said, there's this really intricate tie, which I was talking to someone else about this recently, in relation to my cousin passing, with how we deal with transitions and endings when people are still living. And for so long, I did not know how to navigate that. And it was like, I didn't want to let it end. I didn't want this person to leave my life. I didn't want this iteration of my relationship with them to end. And the holding on is what's painful, you know. And I think about the tarot and how the hanged man comes right before death. And then it's like, really, once we actually do come to death, it's this release. It's this like, like I can actually relax. And so that's that piece of you creating the new container, I think. And that's how I see it, of like acceptance. Like, I just always come back to the acceptance, and it's like, I'll figure out how to do that in a granular way and in a day-to-day way, but I have to always come back to like, this is the reality. Like, they are not here, whether that is in the physical or my relationship with them is no longer, I'm no longer that version of myself. They are no longer that version of themselves. It is done. And really giving myself that kind of like, and it can feel harsh, but that reality check is what allows me to move through it, because I know that I'll move through it. You know?
Why do you think, like, what do you think it's really hitting within us? Like, why is that so hard when a chapter closes?
I mean, I don't want to sound like oversimplified, but it's like, that's the ego clings. You know, the ego is always going to cling to what we know and not what we don't know. Yeah. And I think there's also
to
kind
safety.
of it's safety.
I'm not safe.
Exactly. And also I think that for me, at least, like, when, like, I have so much gratitude and pride and love for each version of myself. So then when I have to say goodbye to it, it's like, but wait. Yeah. I lived through XYZ at this point. Like, really, I have to let go of her. And it's like, it has gotten easier for me, but there's that piece of us that's like, but I love that version of myself. And for me, you know, when I have released people, that has been very painful and very final. As soon as I release them, that version of me just like dissipates. And I realized that that's why I was holding on. So it's almost like I released them first, and then that version of me, I'm like, okay, I'm not that version anymore. And it feels obviously better once you actually release them, but it wasn't them that I was holding on to. Yeah. It was that version of myself. And in one case that I'm thinking of specifically, I might have told you this before, but I was friends with this was my best friend for 8 years, and had been with me through through college, starting a business, moving across, you know, different countries, whatever. The second that person was no longer in my reality, I realized that a voice in my head that I thought was mine, every time I was going to post something or do something scary or whatever, literally was their voice. Wow. And I didn't realize it. Like, it sounded like my own voice until I released them. And so that was a version of me that wanted to still play small and keep myself in a box, you know, and once there was no one else holding me to that timeline, I couldn't be there anymore. So I think that is a big piece of it.
Yeah. It's interesting because, well, you know, some say, some of the spirituality space say that when you love someone, you essentially bring their happiness into your own happiness bubble, and it's one, right? And so with that, it is when someone dies, a piece of you dies. Yeah. And like, you're experiencing a death within yourself. Yeah. And it's like, is it them? Is it you? It's all one at that point, because you love them. So we feel that, you know, and it goes back to those cycles, right? Death and rebirth. But I think that I wonder if we had a deeper relationship with rebirth and a deeper appreciation for it, and a deeper appreciation for the present moment, if that would change how we relate to death itself. Yeah. Right? Because sure, rebirth is the unknown, but I think it's so much I think it's beyond that. There's lots of unknown things that people are also excited about because it's what we're assuming. And if you have a relationship with rebirth and you know what that means, you have an expectation of that, then your experience of death is going to be different, right? Like a breakup's not as hard when you know that a better person's waiting for you.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I do wonder that. And also it's, I think for different people, there really is that, did I really fully appreciate this person, this experience, this present moment while it was happening? And I think that, we can say, yeah, I did. But I think for a lot of us, we're moving quickly. Life is, and it's like, yeah, you can be grateful for someone, but there's a different level of gratitude for anything once it's gone.
I honestly think that's probably like 80% of it.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah.
And even for myself, and I know how to work through those things, it still comes up, because you could always do more.
Yeah.
Like that's always going to be a dynamic, is that you could always do more. If you let yourself believe that story.
Yeah.
And so you can't get caught there of like, oh, I could have seen them more. I could have talked to them more. I could have held more space, whatever, because it's like, that's a losing battle. But it does bring the invitation to like each moment in the present with the people in your life. Am I showing up the way that I want to?
Yeah.
And am I not even just showing up, but am I really appreciating this the way that I want to?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was saying earlier with like, what's your last conversation with them? I think that's also a good way. We've been talking a lot about like, do I have an open energy with X person, with this person, whatever. And it's like, it doesn't always necessitate a conversation, but something within me that does need to end or close or something of that nature. And that allows us to live, ready for whatever is going to come.
Definitely. I just think the thing that gives me peace is like, as long as I radically trust my intuition, like I will have peace.
Yeah.
Because God forbid, like whatever the download is that I need to do or say or not or whatever, like that is guiding me to where I need to be. And like, God forbid I get a message to reach out to somebody, or I have I'm overcome with this feeling and I want to tell someone something that I feel and I just don't, because my ego, my mind, my fear, whatever. And then you don't know what's going to happen next. And I just say that for people, because I think people, they do miss things. They miss opportunities, and then we live with regret, and that doesn't feel good. And so I would say, like, if you just every moment trust like your feelings and your intuition and you just lay it all out there, like you will feel completion in your life, and you'll have a different experience with change. 100%.
Absolutely.
So,
and that's such an empowering thing too, because then it's like, as long as I'm trusting my intuition and I'm acting on that, then that is what I can control.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't control the other external circumstances, nor would I try to. I would be insane, right?
Exactly.
But like you said, God forbid I ignore my own signs and my own nudges. That is what I can control.
Yeah. Well, and we've been talking about this too. It's like, if something's going to end, as long as I gave it all I can, like, fine. Like, it might hurt, but at least fine. There's a deeper sense of peace. But if there's a piece of me that's like, I didn't give it all I could, I didn't fully show up, I didn't say the thing I wanted to say, then there's that piece that like, I can't live with that, So I think you just gotta be bold. Here, you got out of the way. Yeah. And that's, what's gonna help you have peace. So, well, I hope that this was helpful for people. I know that a lot of people are going through big life changes and endings and transitions, whether that is loved ones crossing or just, I know a lot of careers are changing, relationships are changing, and we're always gonna have to navigate change for sure. But I think especially like at the end of the year, people get more reflective, and I think a lot of people are reevaluating who's in their life and what they want to focus on. And so I think these are really important things to think about, especially as like you're just tuning into, what does it look like for me to live with no regrets, really, and creating that sense of peace within myself. So thank you for everything you shared.
Yeah, of course. I just remembered one more thing too, and that is that in Indigenous cultures, grief is honored because it is said that it's the time that we are the most holy, we're the closest to the other side. And so to not rush that, because grief, anyone that's experienced grief in any capacity knows that it comes in waves. And so it can hit you a lot in the beginning, and then it can kind of go away, and then you get surprised when it hits you again. And it's like, you have to hold space for that and honor that in every single iteration that it hits you, and not just try to rush through it at any point. But
I had this moment yesterday after we got home, and I was like, I'm gonna have a sad girl moment, and I did lock myself in a dark room, and I lit a candle, and I was just like deep in grief, and I hit this frequency that I honestly haven't hit since I was probably like a kid. And I don't know how else to describe it other than like I hit this frequency, and it was like the whole world slowed down. And I was literally just in between dimensions in a way, in a very like physical way that I have not been since I was a kid. And I was like, holy shit, like this like deep space of like grief. It's like this very tender space, like literally is, I'm on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like crying because of my grief, but I was crying because I was like, this is like a beautiful space. And I just remember being like, this space also feels like home.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave that there.
Yeah. Honor it when it comes.
Yeah.
Thanks for holding the space.
Beautiful. Thank you.